Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. I'm Andeea, a licensed addiction counselor, and along with my co-host, Laura Kissmann, a quantum nutritionist, we will be inviting expert scientists, clinicians, survivors, and thrivers to distill their pearls of wisdom attained from applying quantum biology to their fields of research and everyday lives. Our goal is to bring you easy to understand principles and practices about the study of light, water, and magnetism so you can take your health into your own hands. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Nikko Kennedy. And yeah, Nikko, can we just start off by having you describe what you do? You're in a field where you're doing a lot of unique things. Would you just share with our listeners a little bit about you?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, so my name is Nikko Kennedy, and I am a certified labor doula. I'm a certified quantum biology practitioner, and I am also a science writer, educator. I work with the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology as the director of research. And I also work as a consultant for various organizations who are working on building up their evidence-based education programs and practices, especially around the world that is like kind of the growing field of quantum biology, which we're kind of defining as, what are the smallest things that we can do to affect life at the grandest scale. And it's a really exciting field to be in. And I'm the creator of Brighter Days, Darker Nights, which is a publication on Substack. And you can find a big archive there of posts I've been writing. I started in 2021. So it's getting pretty deep and to the point where, you can hit the search bar in the top and find a lot of different topics that I've written about. I really love bringing a research and evidence-based focus because my topic is really about our connection to nature and how that supports health. And I love honing in on that early life experience, time in the womb and birth and like early childhood, because that's when, our life is set. That's our foundation of health and well-being. And from there, the future generations can grow up so well and happy and avoid a lot of the challenges that so many of us today have grown up with, from our families not having this knowledge then and not knowing that certain things that we think of as very normal are actually very disruptive to our body at that level I was talking about, that very, very small scale, that quantum scale. So that's, kind of my background in a nutshell, in the scope of things that I'm currently working with. And yeah, if you're, as you listen to this interview, if you're interested in my work, you can go to www.brighterdaysdarkernights.com to find that Substack archive. I also have a website that's just nikkokennedy.com if you want to reach out to me directly for like one-to-one work and that kind of thing. I love doing one-to-one consults. And like I said, I work with individuals and organizations because I really just love sharing information, communicating, helping people get like that next little step they need to make their lives just a little bit better, make that ephemeral happiness we're all seeking just a little bit closer, a little more ready to hand.
Oh, amazing. Well, you've been so inspiring to me to grow basically an addiction research archive that speaks to this quantum lens that we are all trying to get more to have it get more attention, right? So thank you
Right.
so much
Hmm.
for all of that work that you're doing. We're so grateful for you. So today's focus is on women in addiction recovery, specifically during preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, and parenting, which we realize are the 4 Ps that we're going to cover today. And yeah, so you and I are going to be, and Laura here we're going to be having this conversation. So I just wanted to share for listeners who may not know my full background. So I am a licensed addiction counselor, and I actually am in recovery, 16 years in recovery. I did not get formal treatment, with, clinically managed. And my counseling background's actually with men in recovery in the intensive outpatient level of care. So what that means is that's when people go to care about 3 hours a day, 3 to 4 times a week, depending on what state that they live in. And this is addiction recovery too, just so people are understanding. It's looking at anything from, alcohol, opiates, other cross addictions like behavioral things like gaming, gambling, spending, shopping, pornography. There's just the sex. There's lots of different cross addictions people can have, addictions to things behaviorally. And also, we're talking about substances today. So, when we say addiction recovery today, it is just going to be all encompassing with those things. Every single person in addiction recovery identifies having you know, a different, I like to call it drug of no choice because addiction is a disease. But Nico, you have personally worked with women in addiction recovery, and I'd love just to start the conversation. What are some of the things that you've seen, like that you commonly see, like some of the characteristics with these women, some of the blocks and hurdles that they run into, maybe lack of resources. You can touch on whatever you feel like.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was excited to have this conversation with you because it's a topic that is so important. And it's one of the things where there can be a really big stigma, and a lot of women are navigating this alone. And also, like what you were talking, with men, like men are fathers. And of course, like men have these challenges, and parenting brings up a whole lot of stuff. So, it's one of the things that can be a challenge. And so I've seen several different patterns. And one could be someone who was formerly, in a strong addiction cycle that has moved into a state of recovery that then can have a relapse brought on by the stress of the parenting time, especially when, families a lot of times go through something really challenging. I don't know why it is, but it seems like babies bring about like massive change. And so a lot of people are navigating like birth of a child along with death of a parent or respected elder or sibling or something. Like birth and death, like they often are going together, and there's this mix of grief, fear, hope, right? Like just a whole mess of emotions. And so addictive behaviors are one of the coping mechanisms that people have. And I'm excited to bring the quantum health piece because quantum health can really help balance a lot of the like hormones and neurotransmitters that are related to the addiction cycle. So I'd love to touch on that a little bit later on, some of the things to, move from having unhealthy addictions to healthy addictions, because being fixated on having a particular routine or a particular cycle or a particular cope, if those can be made a little bit more healthy, you can still get the emotional benefits of like comfort and safety in navigating times of intense change, like having a baby. I've also seen, sometimes the, knowledge of a pregnancy can just pop people out of it. And, a lot of people who are like casual users, it will be the time that they can just throw it off and like that's over, that phase of life is done. It's a open close book. And that's kind of what everyone hopes. And that's like what you think, like, oh, that's what everyone does. It's not, right? And so you also will see like women that you have no idea whatsoever that this is going on. They never mentioned it in any of the prenatal visits. It doesn't happen. And then suddenly in, labor and delivery, it might come out, and suddenly like baby's testing positive for stuff. Suddenly child protective services is involved, like, and it's just like swinging out of nowhere. Sometimes that's coming, and like, they're walking the line, and some women are open and are getting help, but a lot are not. And to I guess part of what I'm thinking with this conversation is to equip women, especially who maybe are afraid of going to get help, with some skills and things that they can use on their own to be overcoming these cycles so that they can have that healthy, happy pregnancy, that really good, start to their baby's life and opening a fresh chapter for themselves. That's definitely, what a lot of us, want to see for women going through this. And it ripples out, the entire family is affected. Many people have been in this cycles for multiple generations, so it can be a really big topic that can feel really unwieldy when you think about the whole thing. But when you break it down into like individual moments, I think that's where there's a lot of power, and where quantum health, particularly that we're talking about, these like, what's the smallest unit that makes a measurable difference? And right, so can an electron affect an addiction cycle? Right? Like that's a really powerful thought, right? Like how small
Yeah.
of a hinge are we talking about for making a difference?
Yeah. That is so beautiful. When you were talking, for some reason, post-acute withdrawal syndrome pops in my head because that's really one of the biggest focuses of what I'm sharing with people. So let's say we have a woman who is in that category where they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm done with my use because now I'm pregnant." So that was that cycle of life, and now it's all done. So depending on the use history of anybody, like even if that person was mild, moderate, or severe as far as like, a diagnosis, if they were to get one for substance use disorder, they're going to experience some type of post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And if someone's newly pregnant, I thought of morning sickness and how, so we know, just basically medically speaking, no matter what we're talking about, whether it be a pregnancy or other underlying health issues, addiction makes everything worse. It just does.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
there's a whole nother layer there. And I'm just curious, with the people that you've seen and helped, like, do you see people having more challenges if they are going either into early recovery, or they might have been in recovery, just challenges in general with them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot. Like the emotional weight is really, really difficult. And I think a lot of it, like one of the biggest things that I see is secrecy. And so I one of the ways that I found to address it and one of the ways that I found to kind of look out for this is learning, like I learned about attachment theory. So in attachment theory, we kind of think of three different types of relationship strategies that people have for forming bonds with other humans. And it's thought to be formed in early life, and so we can talk about that maybe later. But in the case of someone who's seeking help during their pregnancy, we almost entirely deal with women who are either secure attached or insecure attached, which basically means, like, if you have a secure attachment style, you're like, hey, this is what's going on with me and this is the help that I need. And so those, that's what we love to hear. Like, you're like, oh, you're going through this
Yeah.
addiction thing and you want to get over it and you're asking for help. Great, here's what we can do, right? That's what you want it to hear. Insecure attachment style also will seek that help because they know that they have a challenge, and but they will be more needy, more clingy, more maybe less hopeful about their ability to recover, but still somewhat more open. And then the women that really concern me the most are the avoidant attachment types, because avoidant attachment types are afraid of reaching out for help. They do not believe that they will get help that actually supports them. And so, like, as a doula or a health coach, like, you rarely will meet an avoidant person in your practice because those people are going it alone. Those are the women who are going to the minimal number of prenatal appointments. They're getting the epidural as quickly as possible because they don't want any kind of like human type of comfort. Like, they want to go it alone. And that's the type that's really difficult. And then the one that's the most confusing, there's one other attachment type. They talk about the avoidant, insecure avoidant. And so they kind of flip flop between being that insecure attachment type that's saying, no, don't leave me, stay with me, you're going to be by my side, right? And then suddenly they flip and they disappear and you haven't heard from them and you're like, what's going on? And you try to reach out to them and they're avoiding all of your calls and you're like, what happened? They were so on board with the program, where'd they go? Right? Like, that's the
Yeah.
most confusing of the types.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's getting in touch with that and studying attachment theory, especially if you hear yourself in those patterns. Like, if you know that you're the kind of person who's looking for someone to save you, or if you know that you're running away from help that you probably need, like either of those, there are strategies to build confidence in yourself that you are worthy and that you can actually get the help you need from other people. That's one of the biggest
Yeah.
first steps, and it doesn't have anything to do with like health or what the drugs are, or like you said, addiction can be other things. Like, one of the people that comes to mind for this conversation, she's not actually a mother in the context that I know her. She's a midwife, and I do a lot of consulting with birth workers because birth workers face so much circadian and quantum health disruption in the line of work. Like, babies, labor tends to go around the clock and you never know when it's going to be. And so particularly holistic birth workers that are giving that support to women, like shift work birth workers are one category where they are like, they have a schedule. So that's something. But when you're like a doula or a midwife, you are going with the schedule of your client. Like, if a labor goes for 36, 48 hours, most likely you're there. You might have a backup, but it's not like at 12 hours your shift is up and you go home and someone else
Right.
comes and takes over. So
Right.
independent birth workers have a lot of issues, and then also a lot of like traumas and stuff. So this particular one like always comes to mind because I was like, oh, here I made these, healthy these cookies or whatever. They're like, to me, I was like, they're healthy cookies. They don't even have sugar in them. They're like, it was like squash or I don't remember, but it was some kind of thing. They were like to build lactation. And I was like, here, you want some? And she's like, no, and it was very, and she's, realized that she was like weird. It's like, I am a sugar addict and I cannot have anything cookie shaped. I don't care what's in it. If it's cookie shaped, it will set me down that path. And so it's just a hard no.
She knows her triggers.
Right? Like addiction can take all forms. Right. And knowing your
Yeah.
triggers is really helpful. Right. Yeah. So lots of things, this whole conversation, this whole idea of what is it to be in recovery, right? Like at what space do you actually say you're recovered, or is it like always being in recovery? Like how do you work with that language?
Oh my gosh, thanks for asking that. So, when we say recovery, that implies that we're always healing. For me, that word actually, for part of my recovery, it did not serve me because I was always chasing like something like, oh, I need that. Like I would do detoxes and not even have, and like I wouldn't do any tests to know that I needed it. I would just be like, "Oh, well, I need healing, so that sounds good. I want the results of that, so let me do it." Right? Even though I might not need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the word recovery can imply that. However, when we're in recovery from addiction, I think it's healthier to look at, we can still use that term recovery, but it means that you're working a program. That means that you're addressing the emotional, the physical, all of the things, and you're using community. You're not doing it alone. You mentioned emotional and secrets and asking for help. Yeah, pretty much can almost generalize blanket statement that people in addiction recovery, they don't like asking for help. It's hard to get them actually to that place where we can get them some help. And as far as recovered, I love the word recovered. I identify as being recovered. I feel recovered. However, I'm still in recovery because I work a recovery program. So that is the how I explain the wording, but I don't like just to loosey goosey use the word recovery on a constant because for me it had implied like I'm broken and I'm on a mission to find that thing that's going to make me happy, and that isn't a belief that serves anybody because nothing outside of ourselves can do that for us. It's all internal work. And recovery is
Mm-hmm.
doing the internal work. It's doing the hard stuff. And honestly, that's what I mean, there's a lot of layers to why someone would keep things a secret. I mean, oh my gosh, if I put myself in the shoes of being in my early recovery and then finding out that I was pregnant, I would definitely not want to tell anybody because I would be fearful like, oh my gosh, what if my baby's going to are they going to take my baby away when I have the baby? Like what's going
Right.
to happen to me? Is it better I say something now? Is it better I don't say anything because maybe everything's just going to be fine? And I have personally,
Mm-hmm.
I do not have children, just self-disclosing. I do not have children, and I've never been in that position. In fact, I think that my active use made me infertile, but I don't know because I asked for that test one time and they were like, you can't have that test unless you're like, it's just way too expensive of a test, I guess. But I would love to actually ask you that. But before we go up to the
Mm-hmm.
infertility topic,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Can I
hope
share?
I answered that.
I just want to
Yeah.
share
Right. Mm-hmm.
with just to bring it to life a little bit what you just said, Andeea. With my second pregnancy, it came sooner than we thought. My husband and I always joke that I folded his underwear and that's and I got pregnant. But I had been through a scary journey with hyperthyroidism,
Mhm.
and I was on a drug, a medical drug, to help kind of put me in remission. And I got pregnant on that drug. And so I had that shame when my husband and I ended up going to a specialist and an endocrinologist several hours away. We were living in northern Canada, and we had that shame. We thought we were all set to get a lecture when the doctor walked in, and the first thing he said was, congratulations, you're pregnant. And we're like, okay, thank you. You know, and then it took us a lot to start speaking because we had that shame and that guilt that, you know what, this should have been planned. We should have waited. And then he
Mm,
said, he said to us, you know, your baby is the most protected because your thyroid health is controlled right now. And if it wasn't, then we would be worried about all these issues. And I
Mm,
just, you know, so I wasn't a true addict, but I was on a drug.
mhm,
Yeah. So I understand that
oh,
shame that women go through. So yeah.
no, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure there's lots
mhm.
of people who can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are women, yeah, doing so many different drugs and thinking of like, a lot of them do impact the reproductive process. And so, as soon as you can find out about that and work with a medical provider to figure out like, can you change your medication? Can you change the dose? Right. All of those things. And then again, with the breastfeeding, right? Like some women will go like if they need a particular medication, some of those are not compatible with breastfeeding, even if they are compatible with pregnancy. And also there's a lot of medications where it's just unknown, and then women have to face that like unknown factor of like, what are the risks of continuing the medication, what are the risks of not doing the medication when it's and the studies are basically untouchable, because of course we're not going to like do case controlled studies on pregnant women with pharmaceuticals that could be potentially dangerous, and so it leaves big knowledge gaps. So like one of my things, like when I'll read like, evidence is lacking, and that's a good thing, right? Because that means that we aren't like potentially harming babies in these studies. But it can be frustrating when you have, what do you do with the knowledge? Like there's the knowledge that we have, there's the knowledge we don't have. How do you bridge that, especially in a complicated situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we wanted to talk to you about infertility because it is very common these days. And yeah, what do you see behind today's infertility issues? Like, what do you gather from just what's
Mm.
going on in our modern world?
That could be a whole podcast.
I know.
Oh, it definitely
Oh
could.
man.
It could. And there are people looking into this work. So, at a really basic level, one of the first things is women not knowing their bodies, not knowing their fertility cycles. So, like for anyone who's going through fertility, the first thing I would say is like, work with a fertility awareness practitioner or go buy a book. Like I read Honoring Your Cycles. I think Katie Singer wrote that book years ago. And it was just, to me, it was mind blowing at the time, because like I always knew like, yeah, of course there's like a conception window, but like, when is that? How long is that? Right. And so a lot of women just like, and, I was like, really browbeaten. Like when I was young, I think about how it was like, getting pregnant felt like it would be the worst thing, the worst, most shameful thing in the world, just because I was too young to get pregnant, even though my body was cycling, right? Like I had a partner and relationship and everything, but because I was in school, it would have been really bad, right? Like it's just like that dread feeling. And so every menstrual cycle felt like a relief, like, oh, thank goodness I didn't get pregnant this month, right? And then, fast forward to like my experience with this is secondary infertility, because like I tried getting pregnant for a while and I had a diet that was insufficient. Like had grown up vegetarian for over 20 years, and not necessarily, I mean, it was a good healthy diet, but I wasn't able to conceive until I started eating meat. And then like particular body healing things I had went through, like healing high school injuries, which was what drove me to it. I was in chronic pain in my early 20s from injuries that just would not heal. So eventually was like, okay, well, maybe I need some healthy fats from fish because it was joint issues. And so I started eating some fish oil, and then I started eating some fish, and then I got pregnant. So,
Which is
um,
perfect. You had all that DHA.
exactly. Yeah. It really, worked out, and it definitely felt aligned. Like, oh, this, like I could boost my diet and then was able to get pregnant. That completely makes sense. Super. And then like the next time I tried to get pregnant, like again, a couple of cycles and I got pregnant and it was easy. But then after that, after my third baby, which was like a very stressful experience, and I've shared about that, people can go back and hear about the stress that I went through during my third pregnancy, where we were evacuated from wildfire. It was like, full lockdown with the, pandemic, like thing, like all the rules and regulations and all of that stuff going on. Super scary, traumatic time to be having a baby. And then after that, when I wanted to get ready with my fourth, I had several miscarriages. And so now there's this topic of like secondary infertility, right? So women who have been able to get pregnant and then not. And so that was when the first time that it kind of hit me, and it was just such a different experience. And part of why I'm bringing this up is like the emotional difference, where like the difference of your period coming and it being a relief that you didn't get pregnant versus the feeling of your period coming when you were trying to get pregnant and you didn't, right? So like physiologically, it's pretty much the same thing, but emotionally, it's so different. So, there's the emotional factors there are huge. And then like what's going on physically in our world, like why are so many people? And so like one of the common things that's talked about is like women just waiting until later to have their babies and saying that it's an age thing. But what the age thing doesn't talk about is like the amount of hormonal birth control and how common that is. And that birth control being on those hormones causes a state of oxidative stress. So like in the menstrual cycle, women for pretty much more than half the time are in a state that would be considered physiologically, like they would call it oxidative stress, because what we consider normal values for that are based on men who don't cycle. And so in quantum health, we talk a lot about oxidative stress. And for people listening who maybe haven't encountered this concept before, what we're talking about is the balance, the bioelectrical balance in your body, right? So we know that we're bioelectric beings, which just means that, electricity is flowing, and like a battery has a positive end and a negative end, and that the energy is flowing through and that the recharging is like pushing the balance back one way or the other. So our bodies have that. We are pushing positive and negative charges, and that the attraction between positive and negative charges is actually providing energy to do work in our bodies, right? And so that whole concept is called redox. But what happens with oxidative stress is that the balance is tipped in the direction of having more positive charge, more protons, more elements that have a high positive charge, and fewer electrons. And electrons have the negative charge. Okay. So just like in a normal menstrual cycle, women have a phase of the month where they have a higher balance of oxidative stress. And that's normal and physiological. But in today's world, we also have an extreme amount of circadian disruption, sleep disruption, disruption of all of our endogenous antioxidants. So everyone's heard about like, oh, green tea extract's good for you because it has antioxidants. Like, what is an antioxidant? An antioxidant is an electron donor. So when you take that green tea extract, it has a bunch of electrons that it can, donate to your body and help balance those redox reactions. But our body should be making its own antioxidants. We shouldn't need a super concentrated herbal supplement to have health. Like we should be able to do that on our own. But because of sleep disruption, another big one are like the electromagnetic radiation, like the non-native EMFs from our cell phones and electricity and all of that, that floods, it opens the calcium channels in our cells, and calcium floods out. Calcium ions have an extreme positive charge. So that's changing the electrical balance inside of our cells, right? And excessive oxidative stress over a long period of time is hugely correlated with infertility. And so it can come from emotional stress. That was kind of where I started, was like the emotional reactions we have to this, the challenges of this world, a big contributor. And then also like the physical stress from the challenges of this world, right? Like that also really plays into a part. And that's where when people are dealing with infertility, like first thing I'm like, okay, like preconception protocols are for mama and papa, like both need to be working on them, because additionally, like the redox state is what programs sperm and determines how healthy sperm are. So the 60 days leading up to conception, that's when a sperm is being made. And the redox signaling in that time is driving the way the genes in the sperm express. And so one of the big causes of early miscarriage is actually the sperm coming in, and the sperm meets the egg. And when it does, it brings in the redox signaling. It actually reprograms the genetics of the oocyte, the baby, and it's still in its very tiniest form. So the male health can be a contributing factor. Also the month before, for how that oocyte, the woman's egg, right? So the sperm and egg are carrying redox information that's based on the circadian and quantum health of the parents. And it should be, so why does this exist? Like why is redox important for this? Like our body is designed to be absorbing information from the environment. So when you get out and you feel the sunlight, you are literally feeling and telling the body telling your cells, telling your genes, telling the genes inside of your, sperm and eggs where and when in time, space, planet you are. And it programs the genes to fire the best possible way they can for the place that you are. But if you're just getting all of these artificial light signals, those are really confusing. That's not telling your body what latitude what season it is. And then when you throw on top of it a bunch of like confusing nutritional signals that should be, generally the most part from your local environment and containing like electrons and protons and everything that are arranged by that same sunlight, right? So there's a mismatch going on where the body is really trying to do the best that it can to make healthy babies, but they're not always getting the signals for that to happen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You're making me think back to, I had a miscarriage with my first release, like 6, 7 weeks. And I was in
Yeah.
northern Alberta. Maybe I was eating a bunch of bananas, and artificial light and watching Friends every night and Seinfeld. I'm just going back how many years, but anyway, it's so
Mm-hmm.
interesting too. I never really thought about that, and you explained that so
Mm-hmm.
well. Thank you.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. It's so fun to like get we have all of this like science and stuff, but it just like drops us right back into nature. And that's, always been a huge thing for me. Like I grew up in a very, forested area and have always felt like, nature. Like I remember even being a kid and it was like a constant fight, like, am I going to wear my shoes or not? And my mom would want me to wear my shoes. And I'd be like, no, being barefoot feels better. And I remember kind of like having this moment, it's like a moment for me where I was like, I am always going to live somewhere where I can be barefoot for at least part of the day. Like that's like a core important thing to like childhood Nikko. That was like a decision that I made. And so I experienced, all of my health troubles when I kind of had forgotten that promise. And I went to college and I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. And so I'm like, working multiple jobs, going, taking an extreme credit load in honors biology. Like everything is, I'm not that like high level, like I'm going to do A+ work and I'm going to be perfect in every way, and kind of like, forgot about grounding to the earth and the planet and not having time for that. And like my work shift starting at 5 a.m. And that was when I had like a bunch of immune system dysregulation, crippling seasonal allergies. Like the universe just knocked me right on my butt and I like couldn't get off the couch. And it's like, whoa, this is intense. And everyone said, oh, that's just normal. You just get allergies as you get older. Well, then why doesn't everyone, right? I was driving it with my lifestyle, and I know that because having restored my daily barefooting in nature, like childhood me knew so well. And now I don't have crippling seasonal allergies where I can't get off the couch, right? Like that doesn't happen anymore. And a lot of things are still the same about how I was. Like I still am a very driven person. I still work all the time. I still take on probably more projects than I should, but it's just like part of the flow. Like when you know yourself and you know how to connect with your environment in meaningful ways, you can figure out how to work in and make it work for you. Yeah. Big
Oh, I love
big topics. And
I love your story about wanting to be barefoot. So that actually segues nicely into what would be so if someone is experiencing infertility, maybe they're in
Mm-hmm.
addiction recovery and want to get
Mm-hmm.
pregnant and can't, what would be like I have the big needle movers I tell people, but I'd love to hear what
Mm-hmm.
you would share with them as far as what could help the process along. And you kind of shared a little bit, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. The first thing that I always recommend to people, because this was the thing that really made the big difference for me, is tuning your nighttime light environment. So like my first thing is I'm like, go out and get these sleep lights so that your whole home, because one of the other things about addiction stuff is that a lot of times people will do their binging, whatever it is, it's usually a nighttime, often like more of a nighttime thing, like thinking of like TV addiction, gaming addiction, food, like carbohydrates, right? Like a lot of that stuff is like nighttime behaviors. And we use it to like put off bedtime. And people always talk about, toddlers don't want to go to bed and like toddler bedtime, such a nightmare. And it's like, who are they watching? And like, so many grown-ups also really don't like to go to bed. Of course, there are people who just like not, they have a good healthy bedtime routine, they sleep through the night, they wake up in the morning, they go to work, they wake up feeling, and that's great. But a large number of people suffer from waiting to go to bed, not having enough hours of sleep at night, feeling really horrible in the morning when they wake up. And the light is just a huge driver of circadian rhythms and can restore melatonin. And melatonin is talked about as a sleep hormone, but it's actually also a reproductive hormone. It drives the timing of puberty, it drives the timing of our fertility, it drives the timing of labor onset. Like, it is a really, really key hormone, and it's suppressed by nighttime light and fluoride and certain pesticides and things. So there's a lot of environmental contamination, and like the carbaryls, for example, insecticides that are really commonly used. And part of why they're so like driven towards causing cancer is that they mimic melatonin in the body and they block up the melatonin receptors so that natural melatonin can't get in and do its work. So in some cases, there are literal environmental concerns, like people that live in agricultural areas or people that work in agricultural industries where you may need to like move locations, even if you are serious about having a child and you're having, infertility because of the environmental contamination. So all that's, around melatonin. So yeah, I like the sleep lights because you install them all around your home, anywhere that you're going to be or hang out, and then have a nightly routine of just turning off the overhead lights. And like that alone will help restore your circadian rhythm. It'll help you get the rest you need at night so that your body can actually start resting and healing and repairing itself, because the fertility is one of the first things that your body will dial back. So most likely, if you're having infertility, you probably have other comorbidities too in pregnancy. Like Laura, you were talking about having thyroid issues. So like if you have thyroid issues, you become pregnant, suddenly it's a comorbidity, right? You have the two things together because pregnancy is one thing, and then your health condition, your addiction state, all of those. Like, so then these are like comorbidities that we're talking about. So then it's a more complicated field of care, but from your body's perspective, it needs to be in a good, healthy state before it can put the energy into the reproductive system. So if you have a really big emotional drain or a really big health drain, your body's going to be putting its energy in that direction instead. And so we talk a lot about, like, you've probably heard people talking about pregnenolone, which is a master hormone. So we have like our cholesterol, and our cholesterol should be activated by natural sunlight to turn into vitamin D and all of these sex hormones. But for many people, they go straight to artificial lights and have a really high stress life. And so instead, that cholesterol is going into cortisol. And then cortisol, like, it should give you a feeling of awake, peppy, like ready to go. But if it goes too high, then you get instead anxiety. And then when it doesn't fall across the day, then you get that like wired but tired kind of feeling. So a lot of people that are in infertility I notice a lot of them experience high anxiety. And so sometimes they'll come to me and they're like, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything right. Like, I've done this, I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this. And I'm like, what do I need to do? And then I get to just hear like the manic state that their mind is in as they're checking off these huge checklists of like, day-to-day health and all of these things. And it's like, whoa, okay, like, let's slow down, let's light a candle, right? Like, just slowing down and getting that evening light down. Like, that is absolutely my very first recommendation for everyone. And from there, you can slip into more like dream work. I remember coming across like theta healing, and you can find like resources for theta healing where you're spending time in kind of a liminal space. And that is so helpful because your body, your mind, your spirit, they all have messages for you. And so when you're experiencing something really huge and you don't know what to do, sometimes you can't think it out logically. And sometimes you are doing all of the things, right, and should be having a particular result, but you're not. And so then, like, can a practitioner actually help you with that? In some cases, yes. In many cases, it's really about going into that deeper space. And so getting the circadian lighting right is so beneficial for being able to access those other states of consciousness to find the solutions for a particular, for your particular space, for your particular like life path.
Yeah. Oh, you said a couple of things. So you just said something along the lines of, if your body is going to go into reproduction mode, you need to have like a certain amount of energy for it to able to have that extra energy to do that. And I know that, in the addiction recovery space I share with people, we cannot heal when our bodies are in that sympathetic nervous system constantly being stimulated by whether it be, whatever non-native EMF, whether it be blue light or 5G or Wi-Fi or what have you. So from a reproductive standpoint, is it easy to get pregnant if somebody's constantly in a stimulated state? Is that why we want to get our light environment right? Because we have to be in a parasympathetic to be able to have reproduction kick in?
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. So getting that nighttime light environment is so key towards actually being able to wake up, because then the next part is like getting the morning routine going together. And so usually I will have people start with the night, because that's where so many people are experiencing so much disruption. Like, they say like 99% of people in the US are experiencing significant circadian disruption from their evening light alone. So getting that evening light dialed in is so, so important. You can also, like, if you're in an apartment or have like central heat, turning the thermostat down a little bit at night. Like, it's the easiest. Like, if you have a programmable thermostat, like, you can go and do this right now. You can pause the recording and go and turn your thermostat up a little bit so that it's in the mid 70s during the day, and then have it programmed, automated to go down to like the mid 60s, mid to upper 60s in the night. And then that will give your body a natural flow, because the circadian rhythm responds to temperature exactly the same as it responds to light, because in nature, light and temperature are always synced. So that's just super low hanging fruit, that having that spread in the day rather than just like a static 72 degrees. That is, that's really easy. And it actually makes a huge difference for your hormones to be experiencing that flow across the day. So you have your thermostat, you have your evening light, and then from there, you'll just naturally start waking up earlier, because you're naturally going to feel sleepy earlier and be getting a deeper level of rest than you do if you have your normal bright overhead lights on all the way until bedtime. So once you can actually go out and start seeing the sunrise and download those early morning rays, then that fires up the whole hormonal show. And so then you start raising your hormonal peaks. Like, Laura, I'm sure you learned this when you were dealing with thyroid, that you have to get that morning sunlight.
I didn't 25, 30 years ago, unfortunately.
Oh,
Changed that now, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. And I mean, you seem super vibrant and healthy now.
Oh,
Do you still?
I could go on, I could share more on that, but I want to just
Mhm.
say I've heard you in a podcast say if you'd had the space, you would have renamed your site brighter,
Yeah.
sorry, warmer, brighter days and cooler, darker nights. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's right.
Now
And then we
now I
could even
understand.
take it further, right? Because then we
Yeah.
could have like noisier, brighter days and quieter, darker nights, right? Quieter, cooler, darker nights, right? Like you stack all of the circadian cues, so you're increasing the polarity, so that you have more social stimulation during the day. Because that's one of the other things, is people will like have jobs where they, work alone, like in a cubicle all day or whatever, like, and they have very little social interaction, and then they go out and they party at night, because that's where the people are, and that's where they want to go out. And so it's like, they're all stuck doing their work during the day. And it was devastating. The brief amount of time that I had my daughter in school, it was devastating for her socially, to be like expected to be around all these kids, but not doing kid things, to be like, doing work. And it, very socially isolating in school. Even though everyone's in the classroom together, they're all directed into particular things. And it's similar to how it is in the workplace. So then after school, she would want to go out and play and hang out. And like, it always felt like there was a social deficit going on in that environment. And that's a lot of what's happening with people's workplaces, where they work in a way where they're not able to socialize with the people they want to socialize with. And it's very different from like the camaraderie of having a team. Like this morning, I was out, as I shared a little bit with you guys before the podcast, that I was over with my friend. We started by, we filmed a video. We formed a tutorial. You can go find it on our site, about how to milk the cow, because we have different people in the herd share rotation. So we wanted to have a video to show like, here's the good technique. So we filmed this video together, and like, that feels good. That's productive. That's like a nice dopamine rush. Plus we're outside getting sunshine, which further relates to dopamine, right? And we're like friends. So we're like giggling and laughing while we're doing this. And then we went out and harvested. And, we harvested like 7 varieties of onions, and we harvested Tulsi, holy basil, and all kinds of good stuff out there. And so we're getting sunshine and friendship. and we're also working and being productive. But it's such a different experience to like do that and have the immediate tangible results of like, taking home this dirty produce that I'm going to have to go and wash up after this podcast, right? And there was no money exchange, right? Like it's a trade. Like I help her and I bring home stuff from the farm. Like we don't weigh it and measure it out. It's a very holistic kind of experience. And like kids don't get that in school very often. And we don't get that kind of thing in work very often unless we, do a lot of stuff to make it happen. And I'm the kind of person that like, I've only very briefly ever had a traditional job of being able to like work a 9 to 5 because it just hasn't sat well with me. And like I said, when I did, I got very sick. And so I've had to, across my life, figure out different things and different ways of being. And I think a lot of people are ready for that. And I think that how common addiction is speaks to how boring life is when we're just like stuck inside. Jobs aren't motivating, right? We're programmed by school to think that that's normal. So when you're breaking the addiction cycle, it's not necessarily enough to just like do normal life without your addiction, because the addiction is a cope for something else usually, right? Like there's usually a story
100%.
going along.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
You
almost
can
like
say
our
that.
whole
Yeah.
system is backwards as far as how, so yeah, working in 9 to 5. I've thought about this a lot. Like, how can I adjust my environment, do these things, blah, blah, blah. Cause I also work a full-time job where I'm in front of a computer. And it's like, this system of 9 to 5 is just not set up for circadian friendliness. It's just all
No.
backwards. And you just brought up
Mm-hmm.
the social aspect, like the stimulating social aspect. We would want that during the day. And
Yeah.
our society is fighting for our work and our time during the day time, where that would be the typically enriching part of our day in a life where, let's say, we were able to live societally and trade and things like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
historically. That's beautiful that you have that partnership with your friend. I love that.
Yeah, we actually we're a whole collective. It's a homeschool collective actually. So it's also an apprenticeship for my daughter. She has said she wants to be a farmer. So she, my oldest, she is coming along. So she's actually helping. So she's, going back and forth between, being out there helping, take in these onions, or here, you hold the baby, I'm going to milk the cow, or, like
Yeah.
she's back and forth with me, and she's, side by side, she's my sidekick in this. And I'm, largely doing this for her because that's her interest. Like it's important for me, but it's, mainly for her. And then the other kids in the group. So we actually rotate, this is an alpaca and Jersey cow farm. We have a goat farm. We have just like a bunch of different families who have all said, we want different for our kids, and we want our kids to be able to have the space to self-actualize during this time, to follow their passions, and mainly for their education to take place in large part outdoors, because we recognize how devastating the indoor environment is for childhood development. And so we want our kids to be like robust, vigorous, healthy. So they do a lot of free play, and then also like they're learning the real ways of life, and engaging a lot with adults. And so it's, very, very social, and it's a whole, there's a large movement into like every place. Like you don't necessarily see it happening if you're not a part of it, but when you put your ears to the ground, usually you can find all kinds of alternative societies that are like happening at this grassroots level. Like we don't have a name, we don't have a website, you can't find us anywhere. I mean, I do, but not the homeschool group, right? The homeschool group is invite only. The homeschool group is word of mouth. And I think that a lot of things like that are happening around that can make life so much more exciting, so much more like that self-determination I was talking about. Like you need that freedom to build a life that's so exciting that your coping mechanisms for dealing with your life. Like for me, it's like, oh, like in the summertime, the days feel so short, or the nights feel so short. I mean, because the days are so long here in Oregon, right? We have like 9 hours of darkness right now, which is more than we had a month ago. But it's still like, as soon as I lay down, it feels like dawn's already on the horizon. You
Should
go
we
through that a lot
segue?
if you're still in Canada.
Yeah.
then you go through that too. Your nights get very short this time of year, right?
Yeah, for sure. But I've lived more north than here, so I don't notice it quite as much. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's tough to get our kids to go to bed because they were wired, right? Because they had all the
Yeah.
light in the day, but
Yep.
they
Exactly.
as long as you get them
Mhm.
outside. Andeea, do we have time to talk about sleep? We had some questions for her.
Yes, we'll have to have you back because we have a lot more questions. So
Maybe we
one
should
of
stick to the outline. We'll stick to the
yeah,
outline. You can
yeah,
keep
we'll stick to the
going.
outline. So one of
Yeah.
the things that, you mentioned perinatal is the most common time to get a mental health diagnosis. And I thought that was so
Mhm.
interesting. And my mind goes, and correct me if I'm wrong or if there's other reasons here, but my mind goes to, well, if the person is seeking medical attention for their pregnancy or clinically managed care for that, and they haven't been to a doctor in forever, of course, some things may come up. Is that the reason, or are there other reasons that it's common to get the mental health diagnosis
Mhm.
during that time?
Right. Yeah. So it is, firstly, many women who don't get regular care all the time will go in when they're pregnant because our society treats it as a medical event, which is more or less true depending on a woman's state of health. But, anyways, that's the paradigm that we're in right now. So, yes, for one, it is women getting care that they would not normally be going to seek a medical professional. The other point, though, is also that pregnancy inherently causes sleep disruption, and that's a physiological process. However, because we have all of these artificial lights and imported foods available 24/7 around the clock inside of refrigerators, like we don't have to have them preserved and like a special way, like a lot of fermentation and drying and like different ways that food was dealt with before we had this technology. It interacted with our body in different ways, and that could, again, there's so many topics that could be a whole podcast in their own. So there's the disruption of, rather than using candlelight to manage those sleep interruptions, we're using artificial lights. And so that's another reason that I'm always like, the very first most important thing you can do is get those evening night lights there. And a lot of people in the community are like, blue blocking glasses. And for one, blue blocking glasses, like, they're good for protecting your eyes, but it's only one person and a family. We're dealing with lots of people. You're not putting blue blocking glasses on a baby. Like, that doesn't make sense. And the younger the person, the more vulnerable to the light they are. So, and then the other is like having matched signals from your skin to your eyes, like having everything in harmony is a good thing.
Okay. Oh, go
So,
ahead. No,
okay.
finish.
So I think every single major mental disorder has circadian disruption manifesting as sleep disruption as one of the diagnostic factors there. So for one, so to summarize, women are getting more care, women are having sleep disruption. So sleep disruption in a circadian disrupted environment contributes to, exacerbates any kind of mental health issue that may be like on the verge, right? That will be the thing that can tip it over.
Ah, yes. And that was actually something that we had here for you to explain to people the difference between sleep disruption and circadian disruption, because I
Yeah.
think that people hear that. Like, I know I used to think the word circadian meant sleep. And
Yes. Hmm.
right? And so can you tell people a little bit the difference and a little bit about your story around that?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like many people, I also used to think that circadian rhythm meant that you went to sleep and woke up at the same time every day. And that's completely impossible. So I'm not paying any attention because, like, I'm a mom. I have work schedules. I have friends I want to go and see. Like, you're not going to convince me that I need to be in bed and wake up at the same time every day. That's just never going to happen in my lifestyle. And as I've learned about circadian rhythms, and I've actually had a lot of, this is another good one, is that a lot of women have told me, like, oh, circadian, I thought that was only men. Like, women have a monthly cycle. Like, yes, we have a monthly cycle that is dependent on the daily cycle. The daily cycle is what yokes our body's rhythms to the phases across the year. So, yes, we have a daily cycle. Yes, we have a lunar cycle. Yes, we have a seasonal cycle. And the light is what is programming that. Knowing how long the days are helps tell our metabolism what kind of food it can expect, in a historical sense, anyways. So sleep is actually a product of the circadian rhythm. It doesn't cause the circadian rhythm. So the health of your circadian rhythm will determine the health of your sleep. And it's not that because you are, going to bed or waking up at any particular times driven by alarm clocks, that's programming your rhythm. Like there is benefit to being consistent with that, but there's more benefit to having your light environment be consistent, and then your activity patterns can flow within the light environment. And it's not so disrupting. Like with shift workers, they found that some shift workers miraculously are able to maintain relatively normal melatonin secretion at night, even though they're in shift work. Whereas most people in shift work, when they have that light, their melatonin is severely suppressed. And so, like, why do some people have more resilience? Like, I've read that it's like a 50-fold difference between healthy individuals. That's not even looking at people who are unwell or children. That's just like healthy adults can have a 50-fold variation in how much the artificial light actually impacts their melatonin. So all of this stuff, as you get deeper and deeper into it, you realize how much things that you're doing with your light, your meal timing, your social cues, the thermostat and temperature. Like, we all know how hard it is to sleep in the summer when it's really hot, because that warmth is telling us, stay awake. And so all of those things are what then determine the sleep quality. So that's why I say sleep disrupt, or that's why I use that phrase so carefully, because I read it in a paper, and I was like, oh, that is really, really important to say that it's circadian disruption manifesting as sleep disruption, because it's not necessarily sleep disruption that is the problem. It's the circadian disruption that's the problem, right? And so teasing out the difference between those is a really important thing, to understand that it doesn't mean the exact same thing. And especially for like women postpartum, babies need care every 2 hours around the clock. That means sleep disruption. It doesn't have to mean circadian disruption, right? Because if your light environment's good, if you're maintaining your normal daytime eating habits, you can be up around with the clock with your baby. And it's fine when you have those nice red evening lights, that like candlelit tone. It's so much, and I've experienced this personally. I have 4 children, so have been through 4 different postpartums, and can tell you that it is much easier when you actually have an evening environment that is set up to, like, you shouldn't ever feel your eyes like constrict. Like, your lighting should never feel painful at night. Like, if it's full dark and then you turn on the bathroom light, like, we all know that painful feeling of like your eyes suddenly constricting. So if you don't experience that at night, even if you're like getting woken up over and over, by the time sunrise comes around, you'll still be pretty much fine. Go outside and get some natural sunlight. So that's, just so key to being able to make it through the whole pregnancy, birth, postpartum experience and still feel well, to still have like strong emotional resilience and mental strength, and not slip it back into unhealthy cope patterns, which is, kind of the theme of this conversation, is like, how are we coping with the challenges brought on by a pregnancy?
Yeah.
Nikko, just on that, do you need more sleep with just to feel like it sounds so tiring to when you describe waking up every 2 hours and feeding the baby, even though they keep the light right. But in the end, do you need actually more
Yeah.
sleep? Do you go to bed a little
Oh,
earlier? Do you go to bed? The
oh,
kids go to bed?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this was revolutionary to me, to learn to stay in bed. So anytime the light, so anytime your light, like the daytime daylight, goes below 15 hours, or is it darkness? It's darkness. If you're exposed to 14 hours or more of darkness per night, you naturally slip into a polyphasic sleep pattern. So this is from Thomas Ware. He wrote a paper called Human Biphasic Sleep or something like that. And so he proved this by having people inside the lab. And this was the thing that cracked it open. I was like, oh, all right, that makes so much sense. So for a postpartum mama, yes, she is spending many more hours in bed than someone else. She's not compressing her sleep into an 8-hour window. That's impossible. But the problem is that families will try to maintain the idea that they only need 8 hours in bed, but they're getting woken up over and over. So instead of that, they need many more hours of darkness. And traditional postpartum care involved making a den and having the woman stay in bed pretty much for, 30 to 40 days of staying in her bedroom. So you have like a nice dim environment where melatonin secretion is flowing. It's going into the breast milk. The baby's getting melatonin from the breast milk, and really, really resting. And like in the US, we have a 5-5-5 postpartum. So 5 days in the bed, 5 days on the bed, 5 days near the bed, right? So that works out to only about 2 weeks, which is like half or less of what a traditional postpartum rest period would be. However, even that feels like a lot based on how the expectations we have of families, and these like nuclear families that we have, where it's not as supported by by a greater society, by a generational household, and smaller family size. Like a lot of people have been in families where it's like 2 kids, 2 kids, 2 kids, right? Whereas, larger family size, like if someone has, 6 aunties, that's very different than having one auntie, right? How many cousins does that work out to being around, right? How many more meals are brought by? How many more social interactions are you getting? All of this modern stuff is, very difficult on many, many levels.
Yeah. All right. There are a few more questions here on sleep. One of the things I want to is because you were talking about postpartum. With the women that you help that are in addiction recovery, do you feel that I have worse postpartum depression than maybe an average person who's not experiencing that layer of addiction recovery?
I mean, in the worst case scenarios, and I've seen this happen twice now, the baby is taken for care by someone who's considered more fit. And so the mom is left with her entire postpartum hormonal cascade and no baby, and very little say over what's happening with the baby. And that is an extremely devastating situation for, both. And that is part of why I wanted to have this conversation, so that women who are earlier in their journey have tools to be able to hopefully get their addiction patterns shifted into healthier addictions, so that they can keep their baby, because the baby is going to help with having that full hormonal pattern. Because one of the things that happens is that in pregnancy, the placenta is the source of melatonin for the mother and the baby. So the placenta is making a lot of melatonin for the baby, but it's also going back for the mom. So melatonin levels circulate to really, really high levels. That's really, really high antioxidant potential in the body. When the birth happens, the placenta is also birthed. And so the mom loses that supplemental melatonin that she had. Plus, most women are birthing in really like bright artificial lights through, overnight. And so they get a whole bunch of circadian disruption. Sometimes they have their baby for a little while and then it's taken, or the baby's taken right away. And so that is a really difficult combination. Postpartum psychosis is associated with severely decreased melatonin levels. So yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, when you think about like what the absolute worst is, that's a really hard situation for moms to be in. And like, talk about shame, talk about, them then going back to wherever they have to go. And everyone has known they're pregnant and they have no baby, but their baby's not dead, but they don't have it. And so that's a really common place for women to fall even deeper into their cycles than they may have been before the whole experience.
So just to be clear, they weren't using during pregnancy, but maybe they were before the pregnancy, and then just the mental health is so severe that the baby's taken away because they're seen as unfit, but they're not using substances, or they are using substances.
Still using.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was clear.
Right. No,
okay.
These are women that are still, many women use through their entire pregnancies. Babies go through withdrawal because their moms are on opiates. The babies are born. The babies are often born premature. The babies are testing positive for opiates. The babies have to have carefully delivered opiates because the withdrawal symptoms are so severe, right? So they need NICU care. They need specialized care to wean these babies off of the drugs that their moms were using during pregnancy.
Okay.
Right. So what's the most extreme? Like, how does this flow? Like, why is this issue so near and dear to me is that, families can get completely broken and these babies are stuck into foster system or family care if they're lucky, but more likely foster situations. Lifelong difficulties for people who grew up in that way, who had my lucky baby. He's getting to hear some heavy topics that are maybe above his age grade, but I've got my 1-year-old sitting on the lap for those who don't see the video here. But
are those babies more prone to addiction from from that or
Possibly.
okay. Possibly.
Possibly that it's, yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of research into this topic because it's, thankfully it's fairly rare, but when I talk it's rare like in day to day, but talking with people who work in the NICU, that is a lot of what they are seeing. A lot of the NICU babies, it's just like rows upon rows. Like I've talked with a nurse and she told me, oh yeah, the babies whose parents are here with them recover a lot better. They do a lot better. They get out of here quicker. And, a lot of addiction and poverty often go hand in hand. So that's one of the other challenges is that the facilities to care for these babies aren't necessarily distributed in all the communities. So that's one of the other things that can happen is the baby needs to get transferred somewhere that's potentially very far away. And then the hospital doesn't have housing for all of the families. So if the family can't afford to stay in a hotel, then they can't afford to be near their baby. There are so many lonely babies in NICUs. Yeah, they get sent to the regional NICU that's potentially hours and hours away from where the family's living. So it's way better to reach out for help earlier on and not just necessarily believe that you're going to be the one who can go it alone, right? For anyone who might be going through this or who might see someone going through this, like getting someone to help. And that's where we didn't really have time to talk about in this today, but I would love to share about the ways that working with quantum health, circadian health can really help balance all of the hormones and things and give more mental, emotional, spiritual space for affecting change in your life. Yeah.
Well, I do want to just add that if anybody's listening and like you said, and either know someone or it is you going through the situation, there's a lot of layers of fear and shame and feelings that like we just can't even fathom asking for help because there's just so much fear of the what if. And people who like take away the pregnancy part, like people who are just like in their active use, that is also what they're feeling. But then when you put the pregnancy, it complicates things even more. And just know that your medical providers probably have resources for you to get the care that you need, and it would set and will set you up for success to be getting the treatment as soon as possible. I know there are treatment places that allow the mothers to have their babies, and also if there's other kiddos that house the kiddos as well. Though I know of some in Minnesota because that is where I traditionally, was first licensed and giving those kinds of recommendations when I was working more in a residential kind of in my internships and whatnot. There are resources like that for people. And I only hope that there are in other states because it's absolutely devastating situation for somebody to go through when they could have been in treatment, getting care and setting themselves up for success for when the baby comes.
Right. Exactly. So like I said, that like getting the circadian light environment is just this little tiny piece that can have huge impacts down the line for protecting, the family from those situations, spending more time outside in natural daylight, spending time away from like devices and electrical signals, and then, getting into like a nutritional diet. Like one of the biggest things that I always recommend is seafood. And so many people think they don't like seafood, but if you eat it enough times, your body will start to recognize it as a healthy signal and develop the appetite for it. And that DHA is hugely protective for helping you feel good and giving you the fats and proteins you need for healthier hormonal patterns so that you can have the bandwidth to make these changes. Because when you're just like underwater with a really challenging addiction and then a really stressful situation of a pregnancy, whether it was one you wanted or not, that it can just be such a boon. I shared earlier that seafood was a huge deal for me, and it was really, just really transformative to my whole life to give that to myself, especially after growing up without that, with believing that it was wrong to eat that, and overcoming that. That was like a feeling of shame and difficulty and self-worth and all of that can really help. And so that seafood, as I've shared a lot, around that, because I want people to know, especially if they're dealing with addiction, that seafood feeds the endocannabinoid system. Endocannabinoid system regulates the rest of your appetite, as well as your ability to experience like bliss and feelings of like calm and comfort. So like appetite dysregulation is really common with addiction. And so if you can get yourself to actually eat some seafood on a regular basis, that can give you an underlying space where you actually can start to feel more, worthy and calm and having healthy appetites. So that's the biggest nutritional advice I have for women who are pregnant, but especially if going through any kind of addiction kind of process, recovery process. Yeah.
Oh, I love that tip. Yeah, the other needle movers, and then we can end here, are, for me, I like to share with people, are blocking the blue light at night, but also the sunrise for the hormonal cascades that need to happen, and then UVA rise for the neurotransmitter cascades. And then even from an addiction standpoint, actually, UVB rise is very important too because of POMC and the dopaminergic pathway and all the alpha, beta, gamma, MSH, and all of that is very important when you're sharing about the nutrition piece, because that, to my understanding, controls the BM, and it has a role in appetite regulation. So yeah, it's really like the light environment is just, it's so huge. And yeah, and introducing baby steps, because I know earlier when you were sharing sunlight, for me in my active addiction, sunlight was a negative thing. Party's over,
Yeah.
sun is up, and there were a
Yeah.
lot of activity that was in the night, socially stimulating all through the night, no sleep.
Yep.
And then sun comes up, you go inside and you're paranoid, so you stay inside during the day, so you don't have to socially talk to anybody who's, not, an addiction like you are. So there's a lot of change happening. There's a lot of layers to this. And yeah, we are all here to support anyone who may be suffering. And please I have a lot of resources for anybody who's listening to this who is struggling with addiction or needs resources, whether you are a woman in recovery or a man in recovery, pregnant or not. Do reach out to me, and yeah, I can help.
That's great. And that's exactly why I was so happy to have this conversation with you, because I know that you also have these quantum pieces. And one of the other devastating patterns I've seen is people go through recovery program after recovery program after recovery program, and falling right back into the lifestyles, or it transforms. And some like you said, the post-acute recovery, right?
Post-acute withdrawal syndrome.
Post-acute withdrawal syndrome. Yeah, that people think that they're through it earlier than they are, or in oftentimes they get court mandated recovery programs given to them. They didn't go into it by choice. They're just doing it to avoid jail time. And so it's just a matter of like checking off the boxes until they can get back to it. And so that's where I think that you, as someone who has the quantum health pieces, have the potential to reach a deeper biological level of transformation and change than any of the mainstream recovery programs that I'm aware of are able to reach.
Yeah, I remember sleep was a huge thing that was processed in group. And I remember feeling very helpless because, I had a sleep hygiene lecture, and it's all good tips and everything, but it wasn't getting to the heart of the problem. Like, I didn't know about light at the time. I didn't know that missing piece. And it would have really helped so many people, because yes, with the post-acute withdrawal syndrome, it is all about circadian disruption. Sleep is just a symptom of that, but sleep issues are a pause. And there are so many post-acute withdrawal syndrome symptoms, and it can be, it's just like stacked on top of each other, like layered. And if you get your circadian rhythm right and your light environment right, and you're blocking that artificial blue light at night, you're going to see a lot of these symptoms fall away way sooner than the 2 years that they say they're going to be sticking around. And I would argue too, some of them stick around longer than that, depending on the environment that you're in. So yeah. Anyway, we could keep talking, but I want to respect your time, Nikko. Thank you so much. I think she's going to end us off and ask you one more question.
Yeah, just to finish that seafood piece. It's interesting that that is, the DHA and seafood is key in the leptin protocol. So I find that, so it's just the way you explained it brought more depth to when we coach. I coach people, in reversing their leptin and resetting their leptin, if you want to call it.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
and then also, we haven't talked much about the food addiction, but that comes into my world as a quantum nutritionist. Yeah. So you gave me all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
ideas I'm going to use with clients. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. And something else that you should know with that is that pregnancy is a state that you could describe it as a physiological leptin resistance, because appetite and metabolism get uncoupled via leptin in pregnancy. And so it's one of the big challenges for people when they do go into pregnancy and they're being told all of this stuff about what they're supposed to be eating in pregnancy, and yet their body is not necessarily giving them the right signals, because the body is dealing with an ancient world. The body is dealing with these expectations that the food that's around is going to be the food that's in season, and that the light it's getting is in time with the season. But today, since that's not the happening, the appetite piece is really big. So a lot of women who eat super healthy undereat in pregnancy. It's so common. And then conversely, a lot of women drastically overeat the wrong things during pregnancy. And so working with someone who actually understands more than just insulin and blood sugar, right? To understand the other hormones that are also working alongside insulin. And then same thing, I mean, we could do that whole thing again with the whole anemia in pregnancy conversation, and women that are going through that and they're getting like iron infusions without ever knowing that your body's iron and copper stores are sequestered in the melanin to release when you need it and to hold it in so that it doesn't get toxic. Huge pieces from quantum that are missing in the pregnancy care, even very holistic practitioners, because there's so much to learn and all of this is so new. So
okay, so on that, Nikko,
yeah,
we're going to officially ask you, will you come back? Because we actually have we have so many questions on supplementation, like for pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we have so many questions for you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been, for having such a heavy topic, this has been really fun to chat with you and with you both, and to hear your stories and perspectives. And yeah, I would love to talk more with nutrition, knowing your background. And yeah, would
We'll do
definitely
that
love
for
to come
sure.
back on. Yeah.
We have a signature question, and then I'd like to actually officially do a little thank you. But that signature question, I don't know if you've heard it on our podcasts, but it is, what is quantum healthy to you? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So to me, quantum healthy, I feel quantum health as an energetic framework. When you're moving from an understanding of health as your gross body into understanding health as your fluid and electrical body. So we're looking at, food, not just what is this physically, but what is this energetically. And same thing with all of the different health practices. So, like I defined earlier, that when we're looking at like quantum means, what's the smallest unit? So at present, the smallest unit of light is a photon. The smallest unit of electricity is an electron. So, some people will define it as like subatomic, but like, quantum eventually could go even to a lower level than subatomic, as our ability to understand goes farther. So that to me is the really exciting thing, is that it's something that is so small you can't see it, but you can feel it. And that's the real power, is that it's instantaneous transformation, instantaneous communication. It starts to get at where we can use intuitive healing, where we can actually, like, what Reiki practitioners and all kinds of people, like, how can a mountain heal you? Like, quantum starts to get at those different, energetic questions. And that's where it's so powerful to me. So to be quantum healthy is to be energetically healthy in the environment, not just like your local environment, but like even like at the level of the universe, right? Because quantum starts to describe the non-local communications between things that aren't physically connected.
Beautiful. Looking at the stars last week at our cottage, I guess was a part
Yeah.
of that deeper connection.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Nikko,
Mhm.
Andeea and I both want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Just first of all, we had a first. Andeea, don't know if you noticed this, but we had a first on this podcast. We had our first mom to successfully breastfeed her baby. And you wouldn't notice that. You probably know
Yes,
that
I
if you
did
don't if you
notice.
aren't on me. But we actually saw this baby so happy and calm at the end. So congratulations on that. And just want to go back to your quote you gave us at the beginning. Hopefully we'll capture this somewhere and put it on social media. But thank you for helping the moms out there learn to do the smallest, or inspire them to do the smallest things to affect their
Mhm.
babies' lives, maybe the babies of the future, at the grandest scale, and to help them become self-determined and self-actualized young adults. And also for giving the research to help new moms now have the permission to get more sleep. I think that was so special that was brought out in this podcast. And maybe to eat the seafood that they might not have, maybe to challenge them to eat seafood if they didn't eat it before. And just to sum it all up, thank you for being a light to all the moms out there, whether they're in recovery because they're going to need that or not. All the moms out there, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. From the bottom of my heart.
And we'll see you next time
That's
All
great.
right.
on the
Thanks,
Looking forward
podcast.
to
everyone.
it.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikko.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakissmanwellness.com and Andeea at andeearay.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.